Hey everyone, Matt here, and this is inspired by. In this series, Yugs and myself try to take concepts from video games, comic books, movies, anime, and other media and recreate them in the Unreal Engine. In this episode, I'm going to be trying to recreate the Breath of the Wild slow motion bow aiming. For those of you who haven't played Breath of the Wild, in the game when you're in the air and start aiming your bow, time slows down and you use stamina, and that allows you to aim your shots better to target enemy weak points. So how did I make this in Unreal? Well, let's find out. I started by first grabbing the required animations on Mixamo. Thankfully, there was a good assortment of bow aiming and firing animations that I was able to use. After I started pulling these in, I started setting up states for both the character and animation blueprints to be able to switch between the different animations. These states were not aiming, notching an arrow, and firing an arrow. For each of these states, I needed animations set up for both being on the ground and in the air. With the animations sorted out, I began to look into the bow and arrow firing system since I had never done that before in Unreal. I started by having the character enter and exit the aiming state based on pressing and releasing the right mouse button. Initially what I did was simply attach the arrow to a socket in the player's hand and base the direction it was going to fire off of the character model's orientation and had the camera rotated to match the direction the character was facing. While this worked, it had the downside of being heavily influenced by the character's movement and animation, meaning the arrow could be hard to aim, especially when walking. It also meant that if the character were facing off screen when the player started to aim, the camera would have to shift heavily to adjust to be behind the character. When I noticed that this didn't quite feel correct, I did a little bit of a review of how Breath of the Wild and other games actually work. And when I did, I noticed what they do, and what I ended up opting to do instead was determine the direction the arrow was going to aim and fire at based off of the direction the camera is facing, and rotate the character to face that direction. This ended up feeling a lot better and being way more precise. In order to have the character look appropriate when aiming up and down, I determined the angle the camera was facing and bent the character model around the lower spine using a transform modify bone to have the character actually face up and down. Just be careful when you're doing that to make sure that your values make sense, otherwise you might get some weird results. When the player is aiming and doesn't have an arrow notched, I start the notching animation, spawn the arrow, then wait until the notching animation is done. Following that, when the player hits the fire button, I determine where the arrow will go based off of doing a line trace straight ahead from the camera. I then shoot the arrow from the socket location it's attached to, directed towards that location that the line trace hit on. Once the arrow is fired and its animation is done, the character starts notching another arrow as long as the player is still pressing the aim button. Once I had the bow aiming and firing complete, I moved on to working on the time slowdown mechanic. I determine if the player is in the time slowdown mode if they are aiming, are currently in the air, and have stamina remaining. Also, to avoid abusing the mechanic during normal jumps, I don't trigger the time slowdown mode if the character is too close to the ground. While the slowdown mode is activated, I lower the character's stamina value and increase it when the slowdown mode is disabled and the character is on the ground. Now, for actually slowing everything down, it's not as simple as simply changing the overall game's time, as the player needs to be able to aim and fire arrows at a normal rate if it's to match the way that Breath of the Wild works. So for the character, what I did was instead adjust the character's speed and gravity when the slowdown is enabled, and then increase them back when it's disabled. For other things, such as the moving targets I created, I add them to a global array of items that need to be slowed down that are managed by the game mode. When the slowdown is activated, I loop through them all and set their custom time dilations to have them go slower, then reset the time dilations when the slowdown is deactivated. Now, this means that you need to be careful with the numbers to make sure that the player character and all other objects slow down at a similar rate, because they're managed by two entirely different systems. The final piece to stamina was to actually show off the stamina in the UI, and for that I used the circular progress bar video created by TobDev, which I'll reference in the description below. Once that was completed and I had the numbers tweaked to my liking, I then moved on to creating a course to test it. And with that done, let's compare the two and see how we did. Thank you for watching this episode of Inspired By. If you enjoyed the episode, it would really help us out if you hit the like button below. If you want to see more episodes in the future, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we release a new video. Also, we'd love it if you followed us on places like Twitter, so check out the description below to see where you can follow us or join our community. Until next time, stay safe. See you next video.